Bienvenidos a Exclusivo, el espacio de
Welcome to
entrevistas
Exclusive,
de France 24
the interviews
con
area
personajes de
of
la
France
política
24 with
En esta
global
ocasión,
political
con
leaders.
motivo del lanzamiento de la
Now,
cadena
with the
France
launch
24 en
of
español,
France
hablamos con
24
el
Spanish
presidente
language,
Juan Manuel Santos
we are
de
holding
la
an interview
República
with
de Colombia.
President Juan Manuel Santos,
Bienvenido a
President
France
of the
24,
Republic of Colombia.
señor presidente Santos.
Welcome to France 24, President.
Thank you. Thank you for choosing Bogota and for choosing Colombia for the headquarters of France 24. It's a great honor for me to have this interview, to launch your activities here in the country.
Yes, precisely. This is the first transition Spanish language of France 24. First of all, Mr. President, if you step back a moment and think back to the 4 years of negotiation and 1 year's implementation of the peace process, what's your assessment? What have the breakthroughs been? What are the challenges still ahead of you?
Well, Alvaro, by coincidence, this morning there was a meeting with the Kroc Institute for Peace Studies of the University of Notre Dame, which is the institute chosen by both parties to follow up the implementation of the peace agreement. This institute was chosen because it has a system that is used in all peace processes that have been concluded over the last 30 years. First of all, the institute said that it was the most comprehensive but most complex peace agreement that had been signed in history. And at the meeting that we had this morning, they were struck by the speed with which the agreement was concluded for disarmament. There are countries like Ireland, for example, which took 10 years to disarm. Here in Colombia, in 9 months, not only have they disarmed, but they have handed in their weapons. So things have gone very quickly. Of course, there have been problems. There have been delays. We had set ourselves a very close deadline, but we've really had to move quickly. But on the whole, I think that the record has been very positive, and we hope to continue to make progress so that, as far as possible, we can reduce the time between when people start to experience the change, experience peace, and the time when the agreement was signed. But as this institute said, after studying other processes, we have to reduce that time.
Now, two important sources of concern regarding the peace prospect and its outlook. Firstly, the number of killings of people heading social movements, FARCs, and huge numbers were reached in recent years. Now, this has been ongoing for several years, but it's something that's continuing. Next point. A lack of the Colombian state's ability when it comes to controlling some critical areas where there are other types of violence and other armed groups. My question, what is your government doing, firstly, to prevent this, secondly, to punish or investigate these killings of political movement leaders, social political FARC leaders? Next, what are you doing to reestablish the government's authority in these areas, and not only in areas where the FARC have withdrawn?
Don't forget that the disarmament process of the FARC was completed only recently, and so we have only begun to spread out into these zones recently. This was held up. There were regions where we had never been. Now we're building roads, schools, introducing the judicial system. This all takes time. And at the same time, we have been deploying the armed forces, the army and the police, according to the Victoria plan, with 80,000 members of the armed forces who've been deployed throughout the territory where the FARC was influential but is no longer present. Consequently, there have been difficulties. These are regions that are also used by drug traffickers and other groups that control these territories. And we have seen that there have been certain setbacks in establishing security in certain regions. But what you referred to, the killings of leaders of social movements and members of FARC, this is something that is of great concern to me. And consequently, we have set up procedures that never existed beforehand. We've established a guarantee commission, chaired by the president himself, to examine each of these killings. You know, a lot of these killings have been what might call, in inverted commas, normal killings, which have nothing to do with the work of the social leaders or with their belonging to FARC. Some of them, yes, but as far as I'm concerned, one killing is one killing too many. According to the figures that I have obtained officially from different sources, there have been 47 killings last year, and this year the figure is similar. We've been very effective with the Public Prosecutor's Office. 50% of the cases have already been resolved. This is unprecedented, but we can do better, because this is something that is important both for the FARC and for the community who remember what happened with the UP.
Now, regarding negotiations with the National Liberation Army, ELN, the second guerrilla organization in Colombia, which is still active, you just completed a bilateral ceasefire, temporary, from October to January of 2018. There's some skepticism regarding whether this will pan out. What's your view of these negotiations with them?
Well, I, too, have been fairly skeptical about these negotiations, as I was with the negotiations with FARC. But as we progress, as we move forward, we strengthen confidence, we get to know each other better, and so the difficulties will diminish. And I hope that the same thing will happen in the negotiations with ELN. The National Liberation Army. This is the first time that they've signed such an agreement in 50 years of existence. And so let's hope that we will manage to make progress on other issues and perhaps renew the ceasefire in January 2018 so that we can continue to move forward and not let them call the shots.
Isn't this similar to the ceasefire you and your government rejected?
No, it's absolutely different. Now, we have all of the armed forces available. We have a considerable number of personnel that will enable us to be much more effective in ensuring compliance with the ceasefire, which was not the case when we started negotiations with the FARC, because we were concentrating on the war against the FARC. Now, we are working in much more favorable conditions to be able to manage this ceasefire.
The United States now. A new player on the stage, unpredictable, Donald Trump. This is a sea change compared to President Obama's policy. A problem for Colombia. We've gone up to 140,000 coca produced in the last 3 to 4 years. President Trump said a few days ago he had even considered the possibility of decertifying Colombia. Are you not afraid that relations with the U.S. will once again be overshadowed by drug trafficking?
Well, the relations with the U.S. are relations between two parties that go back a long time in time and that are good. You said that Trump had made a number of declarations, and he said that Colombia is the country that has cooperated the most, that has been most effective in combating drug trafficking. We have explained what our position is, that we have a plan which is working. If you look at the sectors where we're working to eliminate drug cultivation, we have substitute crops. We're going to respect the targets that we've set ourselves. And it's important that the public opinion understand for the first time in the history of Colombia of the last 30 to 40 years We are the country that has made the biggest sacrifices in combating drug trafficking. We're finding structural solutions. We're talking with the FARC. We're convincing small farmers to start growing coffee or cocoa beans. We're granting them subsidies. We're providing them with technical assistance. So we are providing structural assistance. It's difficult. Of course it's difficult. But this is a golden opportunity for us to get rid of this terrible reputation as being the leading exporter of cocoa in the world.
This brings me to something that's been a feature since your first term starting in 2010. You are one of the Latin American leaders that started a paradigm change in strategy in the international war on drugs. You felt the policy so far hadn't worked, that it had gotten bogged down. We get the impression that currently, with the new U.S. president, things will get worse. Conventional drug fighting will continue, usual policy, and there'll be fewer alternative policies as those you've tried to implement in Colombia, and that could jeopardize you and your government.
Well, both things are possible. I mean, we're going to continue combating drug trafficking because it's a terrible scourge. This has financed all kinds of violence in the country. So for us, it's a national security issue. But it doesn't mean that the global war on drugs, which was declared 30 or 40 years ago, that it's been won. We haven't yet won it over the last 40 years, so we're going to continue discussing with all parties involved. But we have a much more effective and pragmatic approach. We know what does not work.
Do you think President Trump would be open to dialogue? He's receptive to that?
Well, the argument about using more effective means, he hasn't been very receptive to that. But, you know, public opinion changes. We have to consider that it's a public health issue and not solely a criminal issue.
Let's talk about Cuba, a key country in the negotiation process with the FARC. They're part of the negotiation process with the ELN in Quito. Obama started a movement to unfreeze relations with Cuba. Trump seems to backtrack. What do you think?
Well, we're very sorry to see what's happening in Cuba with Trump, because Trump is backpedaling. And we think it's important to go forwards and not backwards. But this attitude has been unchanging to call for an embargo again on Cuba. It's not going to work. It hasn't worked over the last 50 years. Why should it work now?
If you could whisper something into President Trump's ear on these complex matters, what would you say?
Yeah, well, I said so only 2 days ago. I mean, we work together. The strategic interests of the U.S. are south of the Rio Grande. And the best wall that one can possibly build is to ensure the development of Central and South America. And if we work together, we'll all win.
Great. Now, on Venezuela, what's your view of the changing situation?
Well, I see things are changing, but not in a good way. Democracy is being destroyed. The country is falling prey to dictatorship. The human rights of Venezuelans are being violated. And the economic and social situation in Venezuela is increasingly precarious. And this concerns us directly, the Colombians, and the whole region. Consequently, for some time now, we are trying to find a solution to this crisis, a solution that is peaceful, negotiated, democratic, at least let's hope so. We haven't been successful so far, but we're going to keep up our efforts.
What do you think about the effect of the sanctions enacted by Washington?
Well, I think they're working.
interna.
I see there's great domestic pressure.
Es evidente cuando
No, I mean, that's quite obvious
internamente. Pero lo
when you see what's happening domestically in the country. But the Venezuelans, the opposition and the government need to work out a solution together, and Colombia will try to help them to ensure that it's possible.
What's your personal relationship with Maduro?
I've had excellent relations with Maduro, despite our differences of opinion. As with Chavez, I had excellent personal relations with Hugo Chavez.
No compartíamos para nada la forma de pensar.
But he knew that we didn't view things the same way in terms of economic issues or democracy. And the same thing is true of Maduro. And then, of course, things deteriorated a few months ago when there were Venezuelan soldiers on Colombian soil. And there's been a toughening of Maduro, toughening of the regime, disappearance of democratic guarantees. This has driven a wedge between us. And so our positions are increasingly separate.
What about on telephone?
Difícil que tuvimos cuando
Well, we have had a difficult situation. I called him and I said that if he didn't remove the soldiers from the Colombian soil, I'd bring pressure to bear.
We're going to wrap up now talking about you. You've been in office almost 8 years now. 8 years as a president makes for a lot of gray hair. You used a lot of your political capital to help bring forward the peace process with the FARC, and you received the Nobel Peace Prize for this. It's still early days. Your term in office will end in just under a year. What's your assessment? How do you view all these efforts, all the time you've spent, and the costs to achieve the peace process?
Well, of course, the peace process is one of the results. As I've already said, what I want to pass on to the country, to our children, I want to pass on a country that is better off, better educated. I think we've made a lot of progress in that direction. We are the country that has most reduced poverty in Latin America over the last 6 years. More than 5 million Colombians have been lifted out of poverty. We've reduced extreme poverty by half. We've created jobs in the formal sector. So we have the highest employment rate in the whole of South America. In the 84 months that we've been in power, we have made great strides in education. The budget for education of the last 4 years is now the highest. It's above that of defense and security. So our economy is one of the strongest in Latin America, if not the strongest.
If you think of all your achievements, how do you explain your drop in popularity? Some people feel you haven't communicated well with the Colombians.
Well, I didn't govern in order to be popular. I don't think like journalists in terms of I think it's important to do the right things. For example, I've introduced a tax policy reform that was necessary. I had a very high popularity rating when I was elected, the highest in the history of Colombia. And people knew that I would start negotiations, and that has taken its toll, but I have no regrets. The government's popularity is rising once again, but that's not what's important. What is important is to achieve good results and not to create problems for our successors when I leave government.
Yes, this heritage, part of the heritage, is one of a highly polarized country, particularly regarding peace. There's a contradiction with the positive view outsiders have of what's going on here. There's a great deal of excitement, lots of discussion about the peace process. What's your view of former President Uribe, who was your great adversary, who criticized you a great deal during parliamentary elections, legislative and presidential elections? He could present a candidate who might become president.
Well, I really regret what has happened.
Yo había trabajado con Uribe todos estos años.
I have worked with Uribe over the years to
Él quiso sentarse con las FARC a negociar.
achieve what we have achieved. I mean, he started out sitting down with the FARC, and he also met with the ELN over 3 years. So I don't really understand what justifies his very firm opposition to the peace process. I didn't understand that. One day he says that he's not against peace. Then he says that he doesn't recognize armed conflict. So I don't really understand why he has expressed such opposition.
Muy negativo en la percepción de la gente sobre el proceso.
He's been a very negative influence in the way people perceive the peace process. He said that this would cause the country to drift to communism. He said that I was a member of FARC. He said that private property would disappear, that the army would disappear. But as people realize, as they see that this apocalypse that he prophesied is not going to occur, and that it's quite the opposite, that the FARC have been disarmed. Now you can travel throughout the whole country. Now people are starting to say, well, it was all worthwhile. They're accepting the process, and they defend the process.
Could you give me 3 things that you're proud of and 3 things that you regret that you could have done differently?
Yo, pues, llevarme el haber logrado la paz con la FARC.
Achieving peace with the FARC was a tremendous source of satisfaction, but I'm also very pleased that I have managed to get such good results in the economic and social sectors. These indicators that we've been talking about, there's still a lot of progress to achieve, obviously.
De haber hecho lo que siempre pensé que era lo correcto.
And also, I have the satisfaction of doing what I thought was the right thing. Well, I made mistakes, but it happens to everyone.
Decisiones diferentes. Me acuerdo una
I
frase.
could have taken different decisions. I remember one sentence that people have criticized me for. I said there have been no strikes in the agricultural sector. Okay, there have been mistakes.
A veces es medio cliché, pero que es cierto.
But things have been very difficult, but I think that I have done the right thing. Over the last 7 years, 8 years, nearly 8 years now, things have been very difficult. Historians say no politician has encountered such fierce resistance as myself. But this has strengthened me. This has hardened me. It has pushed me on to overcome the difficulties, to do more than if I hadn't been facing such opposition. I'm a born optimist. I always look on the positive side, and difficulties create opportunities, whereas people see what might be opportunities as difficulties. So I'm an optimist. And what I hope is that in the remaining 9 months as president, I hope to be able to convince the Colombians to be more optimistic, to realize that we are a great country, a wonderful people, and that we can work together, to achieve great things. The visit of the Pope, this came at a very important time. He came at the right time, this moment of reconciliation within the Colombian people, which will enable us to establish lasting peace.
Juan Manuel Santos, President of the Republic, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for choosing Colombia and Bogota for establishing the headquarters of France 24 in Spanish, and I'm sure it's not the last time that we'll meet. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.